welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Yamhill Leadership Roundtable. I'm going to go through everybody's names, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to Congresswoman Bonamici. We've got Commissioner Rick Olson from the Yamhill County. We've got Al Bannon from Congresswoman Bonamici's office. We've got Representative Bill Post. We've got Shannon Buckmaster from the Chehalis Valley Chamber of Commerce. We've got Mayor Michael Cate from Amity and Salem Kaiser School District. We've got Councilor Remy Drapkin sitting in for Mayor Scott Hill of the city of McMinnville. We have Abisha Stone from SEDCOR. We've got Congresswoman Bonamici herself. We've got Stacey Jockinson from Senator Jeff Merkley's office. We've got Gioia Goodrum from the McMinnville Chamber of Commerce. We've got Jules Martinez Placante from Unidos Bridging Communities and the city of Newburgh. We've got Senator Roblin from the coast and most of West Valley. We've got Representative Gomberg from coast and most of West Valley. We've got Scott Cooper from McMinnville Economic Development Partnership. And last but certainly not least, Yamhill County Commissioner Mary Starrett. Welcome, Congresswoman Bonamici. What we've been doing here is speaking to the community about coronavirus public health and business responses, and taking questions to clarify things from the amazing leadership here displayed. So what would you like to tell people? And I'm sure we have lots of questions for you.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Commissioner. It's good to see everyone. I have to say, I didn't recognize Senator Roblin right away when I saw him. He looks different, but it's really great to see all of you, albeit virtually. And thanks for all you're doing out in the community during these incredibly challenging times. We know the economic hardship that the pandemic has been causing for families, for businesses, and for communities. And I'm the first to admit that it may not be easy to navigate some of the programs and funding sources that Congress has created. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I do want to note that, especially after talking with my colleagues from across the country and looking across the country, that our physical distancing measures seem to be making a difference. We've made significant progress in flattening the curve and slowing the spread of COVID-19 among the broader public, which has been positive. And I think certainly our priority needs to remain that we make sure that the virus does not spread throughout our communities. And policy makers at all levels are continuing to help families and businesses that are struggling. That is part of our priority as well. And I'll give you a brief update about what's happening in Congress. There really is a lot going on, and we have continued to work. I've had nonstop, Zoom, team, lots of different formats, but in constant communication with the people I'm honored to represent, but also with our colleagues in Congress as we are crafting policies to meet the needs in our districts across the very diverse needs across the country. So we passed 4 packages so far that have become law, and I'll do just a really brief summary of those because I'm sure you're familiar with the outlines, but just to lay it out, our first bill invested in research testing and created the Small Business Administration program to help small businesses. The second bill was called Families First, and that's where we created the paid sick and family leave, more flexibility with unemployment insurance, my bipartisan bill to make sure that schools could continue to serve meals even if the school building is closed. I did that with Republican Representative Jamie Comer from Kentucky. And then pandemic EBT, which is a food assistance program for low-income families. Then the third big bill was the CARES Act, and that had the direct payment to individuals, well, to some individuals, $1,200. That's still kind of coming in depending on whether people had filed a tax return or had to go to the portal and put their address in, but that's still coming through. Expanded unemployment insurance. And this is where we recognize the need to expand unemployment insurance to independent contractors and gig workers. And add the $600 per week. And I know there have been lots of questions about that, which I'd be happy to address, but it's the recognition that these are very challenging times, and particularly for people across the country who were barely making enough to get by, and we acknowledged that they weren't going to be able to sustain their families without that assistance. a relief for student borrowers with federal student loans, additional resources for healthcare workers, and then some financial assistance to states and direct aid to cities and local governments. But that's where the 500,000 population of 500,000 or more came in. As you all likely know, for jurisdictions smaller than 500,000, the dollars went to the state to then get out to the smaller jurisdiction. And then significant additional support for small businesses. Despite the problematic implementation, we recognize that our small businesses are really essential to our communities, and that was a very large program that ramped up really quickly. And then in that bill also more healthcare funding for healthcare providers and testing. So that was all in CARES. And then listening to concerns of particularly small businesses across the country with trying to navigate the Paycheck Protection Program. Then we passed the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act, where we did not only additionally put more funding in to help those small businesses, but also put some guardrails on. For example, we heard a lot of concerns from people about like, why is Shake Shack and why is Ruth's Chris getting money, but the independently owned restaurant down the street or the small retail store is not getting the help they need. To try to recognize that had a set aside for the small businesses that may not have an existing relationship with a commercial bank. So community banks, credit unions, CDFIs, recognizing that need. And after that bill passed, we have, at least here in Northwest Oregon, heard more success stories with access to PPP, understanding that there are still challenges with meeting the requirements, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And then on May 15th, the House passed the HEROES Act, which awaits action in the Senate as we speak. And that's where we I think the most important part of that, although there were many components, was the aid to state and local governments. The first funding for state and local governments had some restrictions that only allowed it to be used for unanticipated coronavirus related expenses. But we know that because of the coronavirus, state and local government revenue is down, and our senator and representatives who are here today understand that. They just saw the revenue forecast. And Arnie, you remember 2009 when we were together in Salem, and we thought that was tough. And we know that the upcoming sessions are really going to be a challenge. And that's true with local governments as well. Revenues are down significantly. So this is aid to state and local governments and includes the ability to cover lost revenue, which we acknowledge is because of coronavirus. So to me, it seemed like from a policy perspective, just semantics before saying, well, you can only use it for unanticipated future expenses. So I'm hoping we can get that over the finish line. We're starting to have more conversations about how we can get that through the Senate. Another payment to direct payment to individuals with broader eligibility. We know that the one-time payment, which, as I mentioned, some people are just getting, and people are trying to cover their rent and expenses. Rent's due again. Rent's not taking a pause in many cases. Families need groceries. I know there's been some rent relief, but too many people are still struggling. So we should have direct payments during the pandemic. We also have some funding in there for premium pay for essential workers, the people who are really on the front lines, putting their life on the line to save others. More rent and mortgage assistance. And I wanted to mention mortgage assistance as well. And we heard conversations from people about, well, I'm a landlord. I rent out a few units or some units, and I still have to make my payment. So how are you going to help me? So we acknowledge that that whole system needs support. And then importantly, workforce dollars. We know that when our economy starts opening back up and people are ready to get back to work, oftentimes people's job will look different. They may need different skills. Their job might not be there. So the adult education, youth training, dislocated worker grants, and then also some workplace protections we didn't have in place. What does a workplace need to look like during a pandemic? And I think we've seen with some of our food processing plants and meat processing plants across the country. We need to know what those standards are so workers can stay safe. We expanded the paid sick and family and medical leave, which is more important than ever as we're starting to reopen. We don't want people who are either symptomatic or have been exposed feeling like I just can't stay home because I need to be paid for going to work, but then that's contributing to spread. So we know that there's more work that needs to be done in light of the conversations that I've been having. I mentioned the importance of another direct payment. There's also an alternative approach that would, instead of having piecemeal programs like paycheck protection and significantly ramped up unemployment, acknowledging that our unemployment system was not made for a pandemic. We've seen such steep increases in unemployment, and the state, even though they've hired more people, they're still not able to handle the volume of antiquated software. You probably already know this, but it's just not working to shift people into unemployment. There is an alternative approach that instead of using resources for the patchwork, just simply replace people's pay during the pandemic, and that keeps them connected with their employer, which is particularly important when we have employer-provided healthcare, for example, because now in the HEROES Act, we've included money to help people pay their COBRA, because now they're separated from employment, now they don't have health insurance. So it's actually a more efficient and effective way to approach the pandemic that we're looking at. And a lot of this depends on how things go in terms of stopping the spread and development of treatment and vaccines. And then I also wanted to mention childcare. I had a couple of conversations today, one in the Education and Labor Committee and one here with stakeholders in Oregon, including Yamhill County Child Care Provider. They're losing revenue every month, draining their retirement savings, trying to provide childcare for essential workers. We have a system that was already struggling where childcare is very expensive. Even pre-pandemic, Oregon had one of the highest cost childcare systems in the country, can cost as much as college. But then our childcare workers oftentimes are expected to have college degrees, but they're making minimum wage and oftentimes qualify for benefits themselves. We know that if we don't have a childcare system that works in both directions, if childcare providers can't provide childcare for working families, and if working families can't afford, if the childcare centers open up and families can't afford it, or if families get tax credit or some way to help with childcare, but the providers aren't there, they're not going to be able to go back to work. So we have some funding that we provided in the HEROES Act, but we anticipate that we will need more, and I'm working with a coalition of people, stakeholders and members of Congress and senators across the country. And then finally, as we look at long-term, because we know we need short-term and long-term solutions, we are hoping to pass our infrastructure package as part of economic recovery. If you think back to the time, I was in Salem with Arnie at the time, but the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act after the recession, if we look at those long-term investments in our transportation and infrastructure, we know that they're good for rebuilding the economy, for driving commerce. We desperately need those investments. And as we are building, we need to make sure that we're focused not just on roads and bridges, but ports, building efficiency, rural broadband, we already knew was a challenge. It's one of the many inequities that have been highlighted during the pandemic. When we had education go to remote learning, we have this disparity that families that have devices and connection are going to do better than families that still don't have devices. Even if the districts are trying to provide them, they might not have connection. And I had a superintendent tell me that a ventilator was easier to find than a mobile hotspot at one point to try to get those rural families connected. So the digital divide is a big piece. So as we are talking about infrastructure, we need to build our infrastructure in a sustainable way. to address climate change and reduce emissions, but also to be ready for natural disasters. As we know, the Newburgh-Dundee bypass was built to withstand a 9.0 earthquake. That is the forward-thinking investment that we need. But we also, as we're investing in infrastructure, need to make sure that the benefit of those infrastructure jobs goes to workers who are not traditionally part of that workforce. I attended an amazing roundtable with people who had been through registered apprenticeship programs to go into construction and the trades. Many of them women who had struggled to make a living wage, who are thriving now. So look at those job opportunities as we ramp up those investments. So again, I've been in constant communication with people here in Oregon and in Congress, but really want to hear from you, Yamhill County, hear what your ongoing challenges are, but also what are the opportunities where we can partner together and get the policies and the resources you need to rebuild our economy. So thank you, Commissioner, and I understand someone's going to facilitate the questions and answers. Or am I supposed to be looking at the chat box?
No, I'm going for it.
Okay,
I'm
excellent.
here for you. That's my job. I can't even think of anything else.
You are the chat box facilitator.
Exactly, and
Perfect.
I'm honored to be that. I think that the first question we'll go to is from Councillor Drabkin from the city of McMinnville, and then we're going to make sure that Shannon Buckmaster and Gioia Goodrum from our representative chambers ask questions. And I also want to make sure that after that we get some comments or questions from Representative Post, since he needs to leave early.
Terrific. Thanks,
Okay,
Commissioner.
Councillor Drabkin.
Thank you. Thank you for the time and thank you for being here. I'll be very brief. I have a couple questions and one thing I just want to make everybody aware of. On the questions, the first easy yes, no is the replacement pay that you were talking about. Is that in the HEROES Act or is that something subsequent? I'll ask all of them because
It's in the HEROES Act.
It's in the HEROES Act. Okay.
Oh, you mean you mean the paycheck recovery? No, that's not. That's a separate.
That's not.
I
Okay.
thought you meant the direct payment. No, that's a separate proposal because it's an alternative approach, but we are continuing to have the conversations about it.
From all the business leaders I talked to, that would be so much more beneficial. One of the biggest the lines that I hear, especially in restaurants about PPP, is that it's an 8-week solution for an 18-month problem. I'm sure your office is aware, but wanted to make sure your office was aware of the acts of the Independent Restaurant Stabilization Fund. And
Yes.
I'll just leave. Okay,
And I'm very much supportive of the Independent Restaurant Stabilization Fund, but also the good news is later this week, we will be voting in the House on 2 pieces of legislation to give more flexibility to the PPP program, but also to move that timeline out.
Oh, great. Okay.
We'll keep you posted.
Okay.
That's this week.
Thank you. And then, so the thing that I wanted to kind of make everybody aware of is the largest barrier that we're having for moving people from moteling. This is with our CAP organization. We're very successful with this so far and moving people into permanent housing. Our largest barrier right now is actually acquiring documentation. And so it's slowing the timeline that we're able to move people into housing because the DMV is closed, so you can't get IDs, social security cards, birth certificates, all of those types of things. And so we actually could be moving people more rapidly from the streets into permanent housing, but our average lead time is about 6 weeks per household based on those limitations.
Councilor, have you spoken with the state about that issue?
That just came in a meeting this morning, so this is my first opportunity to report that.
Okay.
Then I just, as a general question, I'm wondering if you're aware of anyone that's doing some sort of comparative empirical data anywhere in the US showing the effects of areas where masks are mandated versus not mandated. And that's all of my questions. And thank you again for the time.
Thank you, Councilor. And I'm not aware of, but I would imagine that someone is doing that kind of research, and we can certainly check and follow up. I know, looks like Al's taking notes right now. We can certainly check and see if someone is following up on that. I know certainly the public health experts are recommending it, and and somebody has to be doing some sort of study on it. So we'll see if we can track something down.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Councilor Drabkin. I believe the next person on the list here is Shannon Buckmaster from the Chehalis Valley Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, thank you so much, Congresswoman Bonamici, for being part of this call today. And we really appreciate having Al Bannon on these calls on a regular basis as well. So thank you for sharing those resources and being responsive to both our questions and our requests. I did initially have a question about whether or not the infrastructure package could be used for the completion of the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. It looks like Commissioner Olson has very thoughtfully responded to that question in the panel, which is that yes, the infrastructure bill could be used, with a few challenges noted. So to be efficient with time, I'm going to move on to the other two questions that I have. I'm known for questions, apparently. The first is, we received disappointing news on behalf of economic development last week when we heard that funding provisions for 501c6 organizations were removed from the HEROES Act in order to allow that to move forward. And if you look just at this panel, you see several organizations, MEDP, the McMinnville Area Chamber of Commerce, the Chehalis Valley Chamber of Commerce, and SEDCOR, who are all now negatively impacted by lack of access to funding. I can tell you, personally, I have kept my staff at full salary during the entire pandemic. So I would be exceptionally well positioned to fully take advantage of PPP funding if I had access.
Right.
And I understand that there is still about $90 billion in that funding program that is not going to organizations. It could be going to organizations like mine if I was recognized as a business, as an employer, as somebody who's continued to work forward. And of course, the frustration is that we're working on the front lines of economic recovery for our communities. So with the funding coming up, how can we get this back? How can we address this? And then the second question, and I'll let you respond because that's a dense question. The second is going to be on liability. Thank you.
With regard to the 501c6, the bad news was it was taken out of CARES primarily because there was this perception that, oh my gosh, 501c6, you give it to 501c6, the money's going to go to lobbyists. But it was put back in HEROES. So the HEROES Act, which I did support last week, did include funding for 501c6. I think there was we can get you the details, but there was some sort of exemption for a certain group of lobbyists. But we understand the role of 501c6 organizations, travel, tourism, and chambers and things in the economic development. So we can get you that information about the specific provisions in the HEROES Act, which was pretty comprehensive. The Senate has indicated they're not going to take it up as the bill itself, but it is my understanding that pieces of it have bipartisan support. So I would be hopeful that we can, as we take this fight to the Senate and say, look, here's what we crafted in the House based on what we're hearing from our constituents, what the needs are, that they will recognize the importance of that 501c6 provision.
Thank you, and I appreciate your advocacy. I almost feel guilty bringing it in front of you week after week after week because I know that you're attentive to it. So thank you. And the second question, so this morning I was on a different panel and listening to Speaker of the House, Tina Kotek, speaking about a federal process that created liability protection for medical and healthcare workers at the beginning of the pandemic when it was not certain of whether or not they would be able to address surge capacity for the hospitals, right? When people were first starting to end up in hospitals, positive with the virus and needing intense medical care. And so it was actually a federal provision that I understand that created some sort of protection against malpractice suits for the hospitals who were responding to the pandemic. One of the biggest concerns for our business owners moving forward with a reopening process is that they're facing exaggerated liability for either interpretation of guidelines that are not always clear, even between industries or for businesses that have gray areas. We're all doing the best we can, but it's not a perfect process. We know we're going to have a spike in cases. There's concern of reliability from patrons and guests who are participating in commerce, who may or may not be following the rules, whether or not the rule is to wear a mask. Not everybody is being well behaved. And so business owners are concerned about liability on that element. And then we have the liability of employee-employer relations, where employees may be fearful to return to work And even if employers have done all due diligence, one lawsuit from an outbreak, whether or not, I mean, that could be enough to cripple a business who is just on the verge of coming back. So is there any conversation at the federal level? Could we start a conversation that would create parameters around liability so that as long as there is safety and due diligence in practice, that we would be able to protect our business owners as they move forward with the economic recovery? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate the concern and have heard it. Typically, as you implied, things like this are typically done at the state level, but I am aware that there, just because of the uniqueness of being in a pandemic, we have that situation. I think if we have that conversation, it definitely has to be done in the context of what are the safety standards that are there for patrons and for employees as well. I don't want to send a message that employers are just going to be able to do anything and not be responsible. I think that doesn't build the kind of confidence that we need either from our workforce or from potential customers. So I will keep your input in mind, and as we go forward. And I think we have to send a message that yes, we want people to be safe. Yes, we want people to be secure. No, we don't want somebody to be unfairly held responsible for something that was so unpredictable. And I mean, you're right about the guidelines not being clear, but we also, to build that consumer confidence and to send a message that we are going to have a safe workplace for our employees, it has to be a balanced approach. So definitely look forward to that, getting your input and keeping that in mind as we go forward.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Representative Post, I'd like to go to you next. What would you like to comment or have questions for Congresswoman Bonamici? Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. And Congresswoman, how are you? Hope you're well.
I am, thank you. You too. I hope you're well as well. Challenging times, though.
Yes, it is. More of a, just because I do have to duck out, and I'll tell you why, and that's why I'm going to want to mention this. The House Ag and Land Use Committee meeting is coming up here at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we're utilizing this Microsoft Teams version of this Zoom thing. And my state computer is where that is located, so I've got to go to the office to do this. Anyway, it's going to be a very interesting hearing, and I wanted to make the panelists aware. I don't know how many, outside of perhaps David and Arnie, did your Coastal Caucus have that call yet with Farm Bureau, the Law Center and whatnot about the farm workers situation and OSHA?
Arnie, you're muted. Oh,
We did have.
there you go.
Still muted.
Arnie, we can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. We did have that conversation. We did agree to either sign on to a letter. I don't know that we've done that yet, and maybe Dave knows, but we did have the conversation and got a good understanding of what was happening with regard to agriculture, and that the fact, because of the lawsuit, we had gone farther than Boley and others were planning on going before, in fact, farther than Paccoon from what we understood. So we did have the conversation. We did agree as a group that we were going to try to do something, but I haven't seen the letter yet that we were going to send.
Okay, and that's, so just for a quickie explanation, we all know the OHA and the governor's guidelines for the reopening and for restaurants, bars, stores, whatever it might be. OSHA has come out with not guidelines, but rules, actual rules for farm workers on farms. And it involves, I'm sorry, the neighbor's dogs. So it involves housing, transportation, and sanitation. I'm going to give you a, for instance, because of Yamhill County being heavily wineries. Let's say you own a winery and you also have vineyards. If you're at the winery and Casey and Abisha and Al, you all get in a car together and drive to the winery to go tasting and have snacks, that's okay. And the bathroom that you use there, it can be cleaned at the discretion of the owner. There's not a rule, there's guidelines. OSHA, on the other hand, at the vineyards at that winery, the farm workers have to have a porta potty clean 3 times a day, sanitized 3 times a day. The 4 of you riding together to the winery to taste wine is okay, but the 4 of you as farm workers can't ride together on the farm in the vehicles because you have to have 3-foot distancing. So that's just one example of there's an inconsistency between what OSHA is asking, not asking, what they're demanding, and they're going to inspect farms starting June 1st. Now, I don't know how many of you know the next crop is cherries. That's in 2 weeks. The cherries have to be picked in 2 weeks. I have a farmer right up the road here. I won't say his name, but anyway, it's a big cherry farm. He is determining right now, do I just let them rot on the trees? Because I can't afford to do what's being asked. Porta potties that you can't find right now. You can't find one if you wanted to have a porta potty for the amount they want to have. Bedding, the housing. So Farmer Molly up the road here, Paramine McCarger, houses 64 farm workers. She can't anymore because you have to have 6 feet between each bed. You can't have bunk beds. Unless it's father-son, not cousins, not uncle, brother. It's very random. So she has rearranged it, but still comes up short for housing for her workers. So here's where she ran into problem number 2. Let's say she wants to put up half the crew at the Holiday Inn Express out at Kaiser Station. That's pay equity. We passed the pay equity law. Can't do that. Immediately, OSHA came down and said, no, you can't do that, because the guys at the farm don't have the same housing as the guys out at the Holiday Inn Express. And then, so the sanitation, the housing, and the transportation are the 3 issues. So we're going to be talking about that today. We have OSHA, we have the Law Center, PCUN, and the governor's staff all coming. It should be a very, very interesting hearing today. If anybody wants to tune in, it's on OLIS. I guess what they're going to do is put a camera on a computer and show you us on our computers, on our cameras. Anyway, should be fascinating, but I'm really looking forward to this. And as Arnie mentioned, we're hoping to get an extremely bipartisan, bicameral letter urging OSHA to either rescind or really scale back these rules, because I'm telling you, our farmers can't afford this. So, Congresswoman, I'm sorry to take up all your time with that, but it's really distressing because my district is all farms.
And I appreciate that, Representative. And I have heard concerns from farmers and from the industry. We need to find the right balance to make sure people can stay safe. So I look forward to hearing the results of your hearing today and working with the stakeholders to make sure that we do have a safe environment for the people who are working, but also one that, if there's going to be a requirement that they provide the porta potties and the accommodations, then there needs to be financial assistance to do that. So thank you for your input, and we look forward to following up and hearing how the discussion goes at the state level that you'll bring to OSHA.
Great.
Thanks, Representative.
Thank you very much,
Commissioner. I appreciate you letting me jump in there. I'm going to take off and head for the Capitol.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Representative.
Congresswoman, I'm going to go to Gioia Goodrum from the McMinnville Chamber of Commerce next.
Great. Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you jumped. You moved. Hello,
So
Congresswoman. Thank you so much. So appreciate you being here today. And of course, we love seeing Al with us on our calls as well. So thank you for allowing that to happen. My question is regarding all of the spending that the government is doing, and long-term, how is that going to impact our future, the future of our children and our children's children? How long are we going to be expecting to be dealing with this cost? Because $3 trillion and another $3 trillion, I don't know how much money the government has. So just, I haven't heard anyone talk about it. Only I've had a few people say to me, our kids are going to be paying for this. So I ask, what are the stopgaps or whatever that's going to happen?
It's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. And it's one that needs to be asked. If you talk with the economic experts, or if you, for example, listen to, I don't know if you saw the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, recently spoke. Now is the time when we need to invest to make sure that people are safe and that we can rebuild our economy. If we don't make those investments now, it's going to be more devastating later. So because of where we are with the pandemic and because of the effect on individuals and families and the economy, we make those investments to help our economy and our people get through, and then we talk about where do we make the investments to grow our economy, and that's where things like infrastructure come in. We were starting to see some positive signs. I do want to note though that the tax bill that passed at the end of 2017 was a $2 trillion cost, and it primarily helped people and businesses that already had success. So until we really look comprehensively at our economic system, we talk about now we invest, then we grow. So I'm not an economist, but the economist, I listen to them and listen to the projections about how we handle a pandemic. And now is the time to invest to make sure that people get through this. Otherwise, the costs are just going to grow. The more, if we don't control the spread, if we don't help our businesses get through, if we don't help our families get through, we're going to be paying more in the long run. So that's what the economic experts say. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gioia. Next questions up on board. Abhisha, I believe, has one. So let's go with Abhisha Stone from SEDCOR for you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kula, and thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. Actually, I'm so grateful to see so much of our state representation on the same call and having us talk and work together to figure out how to move forward in recovery. So the question I have for you is brought to you by your traded sector manufacturing partners. So we have several in the region who, kind of going into this pandemic, were either already making PPE, rather had the ability to make PPE, or shifted in midstream and said, this is a capability that we have, and we're going to pivot and make PPE to serve our local need. And I'm continuing to hear from these manufacturers concern that the state is not supporting them in these activities. And what I mean by that is I'm probably sent on a weekly basis articles from other states throughout the country who are doing large coordinated purchases from their local PPE suppliers, who are offering grant programs for those PPE manufacturers. We all know that in the future, the best way to support economic recovery is to ensure that we have jobs for our communities to return to. So as we have these local manufacturers who are trying to sell their products to our state partners and our hospitals, they're finding that they're being outbid by Chinese suppliers often. And as we know, it's not always the case, but it's often. And I've actually been sent copied emails of several examples where this has happened. Large municipalities giving their business to the lowest bidder and it ending up being a Chinese company. Well, now that we're seeing China start to reserve some of their product for their own planned, kind of potential resurgence, as we all have to be prepared for, my question is the state of Oregon, or at a federal level, as you're having those conversations in Washington, are there conversations about how we can work and have coordinated efforts and maybe even issue funds for local buying programs so that we can continue to keep manufacturing here in the United States, continue to keep manufacturing here in Oregon, and support these businesses who are ultimately going to, again, provide jobs long-term to our community as we recover. So are any of those conversations going on?
Absolutely, and thank you. I really appreciate the question, and you're right. And I think the pandemic has highlighted, especially in the area of PPP, which you brought up, the problems with being overly reliant on goods made in other countries. And how frustrating was it that we've had to watch as people were ordering PPE. Sorry, we live in a world of acronyms to begin with, but then to have PPP and PPE in the same discussion. When we've seen these big shipments coming from China, and it is really frustrating when we've seen so many businesses step up here in Oregon and manufacture. So at the federal level, we do have Buy American provisions in many of our pieces of legislation. So those provisions help to draw the attention to the need to buy products in America. And I don't know if the representative or the senator wanted to discuss what's being done at the state level, but certainly at the federal level, the Buy America provisions, but then also just highlighting and getting the word out that our local, when you spend the money here, it goes right back into the community. And you're buying things from overseas, that money's not being invested in your own communities. I remember hearing, I represent Washington County as well as Yamhill and Clatsop, Columbia, and part of Multnomah. A couple years ago, when one of the cities here was buying solar panels from China, I was like, no, there's a solar panel manufacturer in Hillsboro. So when you start looking at the data of the benefits of buying local, it multiplies. So whether that all those things are considered in those purchasing decisions with government contracts, I'm a big supporter of including those Buy America provisions. So I don't know if Arnie or Dave, if you want to respond to whether there's anything being done at the state level as well.
Representative or Senator?
We haven't had a lot of conversations regarding this other than to say that we're having an ongoing battle with the executive branch as to whether the state will use their buying power to buy it and then pass it on to the other local deals, because everybody was saying that the chains are opening up, and so everybody should take care of themselves, and the bigger hospital systems could, our little hospital systems could not. So it was very frustrating. And we think, at least most of us on the Coastal Caucus believe that the state should be using their buying power, and we agree it should be done locally. We haven't had a session for a while, so we really, as a legislature, don't have a lot to say about how we go about doing that. We may have one in June. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. But the E-Board has about 18 million left, so not a lot of money to go into the big buying power. We didn't have a lot, 75 million when this thing started, and we used up a lot of that already. So the conversations, I guess, are happening, but we are not in the process of having a way to have a real direct conversation with the executive branch yet. So I know that we have continued. And Dave, anything else to offer to that?
Well, I would just augment that a little bit, Senator, and good afternoon, Congresswoman, and I think it's nearly good evening for you. Thanks for being with us.
I'm in Oregon, just to be clear.
Oh, well then, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking at this through the small business lens, and we have a lot of small businesses now that are being required to provide equipment for their employees and potentially also for their customers. And yet we also know there's an awful lot of COVID shysters out there. That's a technical term. People that are selling stuff that just doesn't work or is not what it purports to be. So the state's in a better position to vet that equipment. They also have more buying power, as Senator Roblin mentioned. I just think that Casey's Snack Attack might not have the same buying power when they go out to get masks as the state of Oregon would. And so it makes an awful lot of sense for the state to go out, create a bank of qualified equipment that our small businesses can draw from and pay for, rather than to send them all out shopping on their own.
That's a really good point, Representative. I appreciate that. And I know Attorney General Rosenblum has been looking for not only the scams, but price gouging as well on some of these products. So we definitely have to watch for that. I also want to just recognize the importance of highlighting U.S. manufacturing, as we are seeing so many good jobs in manufacturing and advanced manufacturing. I always participate in Manufacturing Day and try to highlight a local business that is manufacturing, and also make sure that we have the workforce investments to give people good jobs in manufacturing, which is something that I'm working on with the workforce funding that I'm trying to get across the finish line in Congress. I want to give a shout out to our small business development centers, including the one at Chemeketa Community College, and they've been doing a great job helping our small businesses navigate some of the federal programs, but also there's so much potential for really having those workforce investments here to help people get into manufacturing jobs. And when we have more people in manufacturing, then of course we'll have more local products available as we go forward. So thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And thank you, Abhishek, for getting that conversation started. Scott Cooper from McMinnville Economic Development Partnership is also here with us. He is on my screen, he's below you. And I wondered, I feel like our county especially is really well positioned if we can get purchasing started in order to provide a lot of different gear. But Scott, would you like to add anything, or do you have a question for for Congresswoman?
Hi, good afternoon, Congresswoman. Thank you for your time. Yeah, just to echo those sentiments that Abhishek and both Commissioner Kula had said, the PPE thing is to work on that is critical, and we've got now that we're reopening, the need for local business, restaurants, retail, and everybody in between to have those and have those available for their customers, for their employees, for the coming months is going to be critical. And we've got local suppliers available to do that, and the buying power from the state would be a tremendous help. Otherwise, I just wanted a couple comments. The workforce funding for job training, I'm really happy to hear that. As we know, in 2008 and 9, during the Great Recession, manufacturing impacted hugely, and the efficiencies had changed dramatically, and job training was key for that at that time, and it certainly will be coming out of this too. And also happy to hear, obviously, selfishly, the 501c6 still being in there is going to be key for so many economic development and economic vitality organizations across this country. So thank you, and very much appreciated.
Thank you so much. And I keep working on the workforce issue. We have up in Columbia County, the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center, OMIC, as it's called, which is a collaboration, kind of a model. We have the collaboration of higher education and industry and workforce, and all coming together to make sure that we have a workforce for advanced manufacturing. And so really looking at where those investments make a difference and getting people into good jobs. It's a priority, and also looking at just making sure that we have a path for everyone to get into a good paying job. If some people choose to go on the college path, that should be affordable and accessible, but for those who don't choose that path, they should have a way to get the skills they need to be successful, and certainly those workforce programs can help with that. And shout out to our community colleges for their role.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have a raised hand from Mayor Cape of Amity, but I also want to note I'd like to go after that to Jules at Unidos, and then I'm going to open it up for questions to our two commissioners on the call as well.
Thank you, Casey. Hi, Mayor. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too. Welcome back to Oregon. So
thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, number one, for working to get the assistance for water utilities into the HEROES Act. And I understand that's still an uphill battle to get that to go through. I just want to continue watching that and hope that something can come through with that. And then I do have concerns that $1.5 billion is maybe not enough for the entire country. So, I know we put a lot of work into all this other infrastructure, whether it's roads or internet, broadband, and all that kind of stuff. But I just still come back to, I think the number one essential thing that we need to provide people is good, clean, safe, healthy water. So that's still just a high priority for me. And then kind of listening to the conversations others have had, about PPE. I work in the schools and with the transportation with Salem-Keizer School District in particular. And one of the things I keep hearing from across the country as schools start talking about what's that going to look like, the discussion is a lot of people seem to think face masks or coverings of some kind will either be recommended and thus not enforced, or if it is required, then those schools are going to have to provide that PPE. So, that would be a huge undertaking to make sure all the kids in Oregon and the country have PPE to get on the school bus or to get into the classroom. So I don't know if a lot of people have really thought about that moving forward yet. So.
Well, it is a serious need, assuming that, I would assume that there will be some need for PPE, but we'll see how things go by then. But here's another opportunity for U.S. manufacturing, and if we can get that going now to make sure we can meet the need and never have to rely on that again. And thank you for bringing up the water infrastructure. It's so critical. And you know, we've seen a lot of good programs here in Oregon, but some of my colleagues across the country were talking about their constituents having their water turned off. The LIHEAP program, a low-income home energy assistance program, is pretty well established, and I certainly support expanding that to other utilities, and agree with you that water is one of those essentials that people should have access to. And so I'll continue my advocacy, and thanks for all you're doing in Amity, Mayor. Appreciate
Only 580,000 kids to get masks for.
Every day.
And along those lines, I'm going to put a little plug in there for the 1 million masks for distribution to the ag community. In Yamhill County, OSU Extension and our Office of Emergency Management are doing an ag-specific, OSU, an ag-specific distribution at the Yamhill County Fairgrounds tomorrow from 9 to 4, and those are free of charge. All right, plug done. Jules, what would you like to speak with the Congresswoman about?
Hi, Congresswoman Bonamici. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for really making the Latinx community feel seen. I did attend the Latinx community leaders Zoom meeting that you had, and I believe Miriam was on that as well. And so I know that you were talking, you mentioned, you know, about stories, and we ran out of time because everybody wanted to share their stories. But I wanted to express with you really that in these past 2-3 weeks, I've heard more from community members, especially like just financial need, a lot of the undocumented community just reaching out to our organization in ways that they hadn't done in the past. So reaching out because they don't have food, because they need rent assistance. And I just wanted to say, like, our community is one that tends to work very well together. And because of our, I would say, humble background, we tend to stick with one another and help one another out. But right now we are really asking for the support of our representatives to represent us in the entirety of our community. So just wanted to thank you for everything that you're doing and really making us feel like we're seen right now. So thank you, Congresswoman.
I appreciate that, Jules. And you know, people have, the pandemic doesn't know if someone's documented or not. They don't, pandemic doesn't see party lines or geographic lines, or it doesn't discriminate based on race or ethnicity or background. So we have to make sure that everyone in our community can be safe and stay safe. And I appreciate your role and the role of UNIDOS in getting that message across. And you know, certainly in the long run, we desperately need comprehensive immigration reform, but right now we need to make sure that people in our communities are safe and have that access. The HEROES Act did change the direct payment to be available to anyone with an ITIN number, not just a social security number, for those very reasons, that people still are hungry and they still have needs and they still have to feed their families. And many of them are in mixed family with mixed status families, or have kids who are U.S. citizens, and those kids should not be, those families should not be going hungry. So I appreciate UNIDOS and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Representative Gomberg, did you have anything you wanted to add before you left for your next call?
Well, thank you so much. You know, I've raised this question before with members of our federal delegation when they visited, and Senator Merkley was very helpful on this point, but I just feel compelled to raise it again. It's the day after Memorial Day, and I continue to be concerned about the men and women who are serving overseas and what steps we are taking to protect them in this very unique environment. I've said before, I don't know how you maintain social distancing in a war zone. And on top of that, I'm concerned about their families back here at home and whether they're getting any additional support because they're going through trying times on any normal day, and the days are no longer normal. So I just ask, as I know you already do, to keep in mind the men and women that are serving us that aren't here and their families that are.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative. And I think we saw from the terrible tragedy with all the people on the naval ship that there is more to be done to make sure that our men and women in uniform are getting the care they need, but also being proactive to make sure they are not put in those situations, but still be able to do their work. And I'm not aware of additional support for the families, but could certainly check and find out if there's anything being done, particularly for our military families. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Representative.
And I am going to have to run for another meeting.
And with that, we also need to have Congresswoman Bonamici run to her next meeting. So if there are any last comments or questions in the brief few minutes we have left for her. Look at that silence.
Anybody?
It's never
All
golden.
right.
But thank you very much on behalf of everybody here. And you all can unmute yourself if you want to give her a shout out too. I really appreciate you joining us here today.
Well, thank you so much. I do need to get on another call, and I think Al can stay on if there's further discussion, and certainly we'll follow up with you as I've indicated on these issues. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you. Of course, I'd rather be meeting with you in person, but that's not happening right now. So I'm going to jump off to get on my other call, but thank you for all you're doing. Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. Please stay in touch. Stay well.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
All right, I apologize that we didn't get to everybody's comments and questions, including Senator Roblin, Commissioner Olson, and Commissioner Starrett. But I'd love to go to, with that,
can I just pop in real
yes.
quick, Commissioner Kula? Sorry. For any question that didn't get asked, you can send them to me and I can follow up offline after the meeting.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much. Senator Roblin, before we get too late in the day, is there anything you would like to tell people in the community?
No, just again, hang in there. Try to be as safe as you can. Keep watching your neighbor and make sure that you can be helpful. There's a lot of seniors out there that are very nervous about all of this for the right reasons. And when people aren't out and around as much, people get forgotten. So I guess what I would remind people to is to think about your neighbors and those friends that you haven't seen for a while, and reach out with a phone call or do something, because you don't know what they might need right now. And a helping hand, a grocery shopping tour and drop stuff off at their house could be really helpful. So remember that what makes Oregonians best is we rise for these occasions in ways that we haven't thought of rising before. And I think Yamhill is another one of those great places where lots of great ideas come out of the conversations that are happening here, and I'm thankful to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you, Senator Roblin. Commissioner Starrett, is there anything you'd like to tell people in the community today? And I think I need to unmute you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, real quickly, some good news. YCAP, has been helping people with rental assistance, those who are at risk of becoming homeless. And they just received more than $197,000 from the COVID rent relief program, which has been instituted by the legislature, Oregon's legislature, and it's been dispersed by the Oregon Emergency Fund. So they're going to be partnering with OHCS to disperse that, and also got another $20,000 from Providence. So this is really going to help the effort in terms of rent relief.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. It's nice to have some good news. So, Commissioner Olson, what would you like to tell people both in the community and here?
Well, Casey, this weekend, it was nice to have a 3-day weekend and do something other than COVID-related things, but and get caught up on other things. But I tell you, one thing I did do is both Sunday and Monday, we went downtown, went up to Yamhill. The people that are respectful for the restaurants and everything that are doing the social media, they're doing, I can't name one that I talked to who wasn't doing a great job. And most of them said they're about 50% business, and you look at the square footage they need to maintain that 6-foot social distancing. There was about 50% is very good to them. They consider it's better than nothing. But I think the thing about it is everybody is trying their hardest, and I didn't see any place that was not going by the guidelines, any stores. There seems to be some confusion on the large box stores, such as the grocery markets and places like Lowe's and Bimart, when they have to sanitize the rolling belts, the belts, checkout belts, and when they don't have to sanitize them, when they have to sanitize the plexiglass in front of the checkers and when they don't have to sanitize them. So I've seen it implemented probably about 3 or 4 different ways, but I think there's still some on the big box side. I think there's still some confusion on what the guidelines mean and what you have to do. So, but that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. I'm looking at everybody on the call, and I think that really, Stacy would probably be the last federal person to give an update to the community.
Hey, not too much to update on right now. We're still not quite anywhere closer to addressing the 4th COVID package on the Senate side, unfortunately.
I thought we were going to get good news. I mean, we got good news, Commissioner Starrett.
Maybe Friday.
Maybe Friday sounds good. I did actually write down a quote from Mitch McConnell that I was going to share with Representative Bonamici, but I decided to just keep it like this.
I did go to the Newburgh Drive-In on Sunday night, and it was so great. And they had really great social distancing measures in place, and it felt very safe. And it was nice to be able to sit in my car and watch a movie and be out of the house. They were doing a good job.
Great. Hooray. Good job, everybody, for getting that open. Any last thoughts? I would like to note that while we were on the call today, I did receive an email from Jody Christensen in the governor's office saying that they're working on phase 2 draft guidance right now, and which is great timing because I got 4 phone calls today from people asking about, about phase 2 guidance and what it might look like. The thing that she's asking for right now is for people in the community, so it's not just the leaders right here, is to tell her what specifically is working for restaurant guidance in phase 1 and what really, really needs to be changed. And so she's asking for all those comments to be pooled together. And I expect that Abisha and Gioia and Shannon Buckmaster will all be involved in sending those emails to her. But something to think about is that the governor's office is working right now on phase 2 guidance, and our county, I want to say our county, knock, 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 is doing a great job, public health and people in the community, at keeping case numbers down. So, and I
sent mine to her already, Casey. What's taking you so long?
Perfect. Right in the middle of this call.
No, I sent it to her before the call.
All right. Well, unless there are any last comments, again, everybody here on this call is working for you out there in the community. We've got your back, but we got to know what you need. And we are really all in this together. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Casey, I do have one question for you. Do we have the ERT meeting this afternoon? So there's an ERT? Okay, yes. 3 o'clock?
Yes. All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.